to Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 25th of April 2020, we look at desperate, D-E-S-P-E-R-A-T-E, desperate, with the view being that far too often the current regime in St Vincent and the Grenadines leaves the citizens and people of St Vincent and the Grenadines in situations where they are desperate and frustrated due to being in lack. The Cambridge Dictionary defines desperate as feeling that you have no hope and are ready to do anything to change the bad situation you are in. And the Longman Dictionary defines desperate as needing or wanting something very much. Those definitions tell us that people are desperate when they are in a bad situation. People are desperate when they need or want something very much. People are desperate when they feel there is no hope. And when people are desperate, they are ready to do anything to change that bad situation that they are in. As scientists the world over work assiduously to take steps to mitigate and reduce the impact of COVID-19 on people, it becomes clear that due to inept governance in some countries, too many citizens are left desperate. It is believed that the current regime in St Vincent and the Grenadines is one such government where many of the citizens are left desperate and frustrated. And it is because of that belief we here on A View from the Outside have chosen to explore this topic today. Everyone knows by now that the coronavirus, COVID-19, has plunged the world into a crisis. And everywhere one turns, there is some discussion of the effects of the pandemic, COVID-19, on countries and on the lives of people the world over. People everywhere have had their lives disrupted in some way. And many people are uncertain about what would happen next in their lives. There's a desperate move by scientists in different countries to develop a vaccine. Industries, including the tourism industry, and particularly cruise tourism, have been severely affected. In fact, cruise tourism has come to a complete standstill, leaving thousands of workers in a desperate predicament. Hundreds of Vincentian sailors are now desperate and find themselves in a situation of uncertainty. Many of these sailors, who work mainly on cruise ships and contribute significantly to the economy of St Vincent and the Grenadines, are now stuck for weeks on cruise ships in the waters of Florida and elsewhere, hoping to get home to St Vincent and the Grenadines. Many of them believe that the government of St Vincent and the Grenadines is not doing enough to get them home. Many of them are uncertain as to if and when they will be allowed home by the government of their own country. They are desperate and they want to get home. One sailor, in a voice note, painfully tells of how neglected they feel, knowing that sailors of all other nationalities are welcomed home by the government of their respective countries, while they, Vincentians, are left not knowing if and when they are allowed to come home. In that voicemail, that sailor said that sailors of other nationalities have dates of when they will leave the ship and return to their home. He said that the sailors of the other countries are laughing at them, those from St Vincent and the Grenadines, because according to that sailor, and I quote, St Vincent is the only country whose government do not want them. So we look like some shameful dogs out here right now, unquote. It certainly seems like St Vincent and Vincentians have again been made a laughingstock. We, on A View from the Outside, join in sounding the call to the government of St Vincent and the Grenadines to listen to the plight of the desperate sailors and to do everything to get them home. Do not let cost be a barrier. Do not put cost over the lives of these sailors. Bring them home to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and look after them. It is the government's responsibility to do so. No amount of excuses will be enough for these sailors and their families. After all, they are all Vincentian citizens. And please remember that citizenship should count for something. Do not forget them. Do not abandon them. And do not forget that they contribute significantly to the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. By the same token, we, on A View from the Outside, sound the call for the regime not to ignore the cries and plight of desperate Vincentian students the world over, including those in Cuba, who are screaming out to be assisted by the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We say, pay attention to their plight. They are desperate. We also say, pay attention to the plight of other desperate Vincentian, particularly Vincentian workers overseas, especially those who are stuck and want to return home. It is not only the Vincentian sailors and the other groups mentioned above who feel desperate. There are others in St. Vincent and the Grenadines who feel desperate due to one reason or the other. Many are desperate to clarify or to have clarity of information and practice from those in authority pertaining to how they are responding to COVID-19. Many are confused and cannot understand how the officials, especially the Minister of Health and the Prime Minister, ignore their own advice which they have copied from the WHO, the World Health Organization. They ignore advice of physical or social distancing, and they ignore advice on the wearing of masks. Many cannot understand why the advice from the Chief Medical Officer in St. Vincent and the Grenadines appears to be so manifestly different from the advice of her counterparts in the region. It has been asked, what is so different about her science that makes her not recommend to the Prime Minister to lock down the borders of the country, lock down the borders of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, when clearly all of her other counterparts in the region and elsewhere around the world have advised their government to do that very thing? Vincentians are desperate to find out. Vincentians are desperate also to find out about community spread of COVID-19 in the country. The government needs to understand that information is key. They need to understand that the piecemeal and ad hoc way in which they are dispensing information to the Vincentian people leave them feeling hopeless and desperate. Vincentians are also desperate for a revival of the agricultural industry. They are desperate because the said regime, which now promises to revive agriculture, are the ones who are accused of having neglected and destroyed it in the first place. They are the ones who are accused of having labeled agriculture as a thing of the past and belonging to Columbus days. Arrowroot farmers are desperate. They want to be paid for their produce, and they want to know about the future of the arrowroot industry in St Vincent and the Grenadines. Vincentians in the construction industry are desperate also. Many are desperate for work. Many feel neglected and frustrated by the entire process in the country. Local Vincentian truckers are desperate for work. They cannot understand why they are not able to attain work to transport excavation construction materials from Rabaka to two multi-million-dollar project sites at Georgetown and Sanssouci. They cannot understand also why the Rabaka shoreline is allegedly being destroyed to obtain materials for these projects. Many feel that the government, and in particular some government ministers, contribute to their plight. They are desperate and want something to be done. Vincentians in the Vincentian diaspora are also desperate for the government of St Vincent and the Grenadines to provide information and advice to its people overseas. The embassies, consulates, and high commissions must provide information and advice to Vincentians in the diaspora. In this era of COVID-19 especially, tell Vincentians the health science which is being adopted. This will certainly help to manage the expectation of Vincentians rather than leaving them frustrated and desperate. Be transparent. Tell Vincentians about the testing schedule in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. How is testing done? How does one, especially the poor and the indigent and those who cannot afford to pay, how do they access testing? Explain why the leaders in the country are seemingly ignoring their own advice of physical distancing, physical or social distancing. Explain why masks are not advised to be worn, especially when Vincentians see in a handing over ceremony of mask, the Taiwanese representative was clearly wearing a mask and the Minister of Health clearly not wearing any mask. We, on a view from the outside, say to the regime that they are ignoring the plight of the Vincentian people to their peril. The people are desperate. The sailors are desperate. The farmers are desperate. There are desperate people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people want change to their circumstances. Desperate people want hope. Desperate people want a government who can provide that hope. At this time of worry and grave concern, Vincentians deserve a government and a leader to provide strong leadership and hope, not one which is bent on mocking and hoodwinking the Vincentian people, not one which treats, not one as in not a government, which treats groups of its people as an afterthought. Not one, not a government who goes on the airways or people of the government who goes on the airwaves and mocks and insults its people. That kind of behavior is no longer acceptable. Much more is needed by Vincentians from their leader. A comedic response at press conferences and interviews are not acceptable. Bearing all of that in mind, we, on A View from the Outside, stand shoulder to shoulder with all of our Vincentian people. We stand with our brothers and sisters. Our solidarity and resolve are firm and strong. And as we stand with our brothers and sisters, as we stand with you all, we encourage everyone to echo the words of the Japanese philosopher Daisaku Aikida, who said, "A person who, no matter how desperate the situation, gives others hope is a true leader." I quote that again. A person who, no matter how desperate the situation, gives others hope is a true leader. Vincentians, the situation in St Vincent and the Grenadines is desperate. Find that true leader to give hope. Until next week, Randy and all of the listeners, this is Brereton Horne with A View from the Outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page, A View from the Outside, and also visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant Saturday, a wonderful Sunday, and a productive week ahead to all. Thank you, Randy, and all of the listeners.